Hello everyone, in this video I'll be ranking the best honor mode classes in Baldur's Gate 3 on a tier list. So I'll be touching on some of the best builds and subclasses for each of these, but I'll be ranking them because there's some really big changes to honor mode and how the classes work and their interactions, such as like getting haste and things like that, as well as all bosses get legendary actions, which makes some classes a lot stronger than others. So the first one we have here is the Barbarian. Now, the best feat in all of honor mode is still Tavern Brawler. It did get nerfed a bit, so throwing damage doesn't get the extra damage rider sources. They did change how damage riders work in honor mode, not in tactician and other modes, but just in the overall honor mode itself. So it did get a bit of a nerf, but it's still a top tier pick. And what's cool is the Barbarian has a few subclasses that actually work very well in honor mode. So obviously the Throw Zerker, which is the Berserker Barbarian, that is a top tier pick. Typically you would go with 5 levels of that, throw in 4 levels of Fighter and 3 levels of Rogue Thief, and that is a very powerful build because you can throw as a bonus action, and that doesn't get impacted by things like haste. So very effective going that route. There's also the Bear Heart, which I'm a huge fan of because that gives you resistance to all damage types except for Psychic. So the Barbarian is extremely powerful. On top of that, the Tiger Heart Barbarian has some usefulness too because you can apply statuses with their bleed, as they have the Tiger's Bloodlust there, which you can cleave, apply bleed to 3 targets, and also potentially make 3 targets go prone. So the Barbarian is a great pick, honestly, and most teams in honor mode will probably have a Barbarian. I want to put them in the S tier because they are extremely useful in honor mode, but I think it's top of the A tier for sure, but we'll rebalance it at the end. Just because the Throw Zerker is an extremely powerful build, being able to add in the Fighter and also the Thief. I'm taking into consideration multi-classes here because typically you're not going to take a class all the way to level 12, except for a couple classes which benefit from going to 10 or 11, like the Bard or Sorcerer, but as a whole, or even Cleric, but as a whole, Barbarian is extremely useful just for a dip. Even if you only dip 3 levels to get the aspect, the Bear Heart for that resistance to all damage types except Psychic, it can be extremely useful. There are some fights where the Barbarian will struggle a little bit, especially with Psychic, because some enemies get some very nasty attacks. I even had some runs end in Act 2 because of that. So yeah, the Barbarian itself, very strong. I'm going to put them in the A tier. But next we have one of the best classes with the Bard. So what's nice about the Bard is they make a great face. So if you're looking for a class to play in honor mode, I highly recommend the Bard. Now, the best way to go about doing the Bard is take it to level 6, add in 2 levels of Paladin for smite, and then the rest of your levels in Bard to get magical secrets. So 10 levels of Bard, 2 levels of Paladin. That is seemingly the meta build for the face of a party because the Bard has the Jack of all trades at level 2. They also have an extra short rest, so you can heal your team that way. On top of that, they get some really good spells early on in the game. People sleep on Dissonant Whispers, but this is an extremely useful spell to go with because it does 3d6 psychic damage. And this can also be amplified if you have the Resonance Stone, so I'd highly recommend grabbing that for applying vulnerability to psychic damage. But another nice benefit of this is it gives disadvantage on attack rolls and can frighten the target, which is huge because they get taken out of combat for 2 turns. So Dissonant Whispers is actually a really good spell. It's also an enchantment spell, so if you get the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, Dissonant Whispers, baby, it's very strong. On top of all of that, they also get nice buffs like Longstrider for early game, being able to increase movement speed. But the really big thing about the Bard is using the Sword Bard to be able to smite. Now, you can smite with, if you get to level 10, you can get the Banishing Smite, which is a nice force damage equivalent to a level 5 smite. But even just Divine Smite on your Flourish is extremely useful, so you can deal a ton of damage. But the big focus of the Bard is stacking Arcane Acuity. So getting the Helmet of Arcane Acuity whenever you do a weapon attack, take out your hand crossbow, boom, boom, use the Arrow of Many Targets, you'll get a plus 10 to your Arcane Acuity, meaning that your hold person, your command spells will all land with like a spell save DC of 25 plus, upwards of 30. It's extremely strong. Like, I cannot state how strong this build is, so without a doubt, Sword Bard, the Smite Sword Bard in particular, is a definite S tier. If there was an S plus tier, we'd put this one in its own tier because for a face of the party, you can't get much better than this. Like, the Sorcerer is great as well. I'm a big Sorcerer stan, but the Bard is just by far a very powerful class. I can't state it enough. Especially if you do a dip. You can even dip in 2 levels of Fighter if you don't want to go with Smites, but you can spend your spell slots on Smites, deal a ton of damage. If you don't want to go all the way in the Bard, you can even take the Barbarian. So Bard with Barbarian and Paladin for Smites. You get your Rage, so you can go into the Animal Heart, get resistance to all damage types. So The Bard is very versatile, as you guys know. It's the most versatile class. But being able to be a full spellcaster and do a ton of damage is extremely useful. Multi-class of the Paladin, by far the best. So I could spend hours talking about how good the Bard is. So we'll move on to the Cleric here, which is another really solid class because, as you know, pretty much everyone should run a Cleric. Now, there's a few main picks that I think work best. Now, I'm a big fan of the Tempest Cleric. The Tempest Cleric isn't as good as a Light Cleric in Honor mode because in your other difficulties, you can focus more on damage and not so much on like protecting your team, reducing attack rolls. But the Light Cleric mixed with like a Radiating Orb build is probably a top 5 build in Honor mode because with Radiating Orb, you can -1 to the enemy's attack rolls. You can stack that up to 10 times. Actually, when Honor mode came out, they changed Radiating Orb from -7, so you can only have stacks of 7 Radiating Orb, and they increased it to -10. So whenever the enemy attacks, if they miss or attack, they get a they lose 2 stacks of their Radiating Orb. But with the Light Cleric, it's extremely easy to add that on. You even got spells like Sacred Flame. If you just want to use a cantrip, you can apply Radiating Orb, but yeah, Guiding Bolt. You got lots of different options for being able to apply Radiating Orbs. I would say that this is probably the best choice if you go with the Light Cleric. Life Domain is another choice. I typically don't like running a Life Cleric in basic game modes of Baldur's Gate, but there is some benefit to having a Life Domain because healing's not like the best choice of your action, but being able to heal better is always a good thing. So the Life Cleric does have some extra. I would say the Life Cleric's probably an S tier in Honor mode just for survivability's sake, because if you die, if you get a total party kill, it's all over. It's game over. So the Cleric, the Light Domain, probably the best in Honor mode. It also has the Rewarding Flare there, which use your reaction, impose disadvantage on the attacker, possibly causing their attack to miss, and you can apply that to the team as well once you hit level 6. The Tempest, still very great. I would say Life, Light, or Tempest would be the best, but I would say Light is number 1, Life's probably number 2, and Tempest is number 3. On normal modes, Tempest is probably number 1, Light's number 2, Life's number 3, so a little bit of a switch there, but even so, the Cleric as a single level dip, War Domain Cleric, is incredible. If you want to take a Battlemaster Fighter and give them 3 extra bonus action attacks, War Domain will do it for you. So that is another great choice as well. With that, I have to say that the Cleric is also an S tier choice. I don't think it's as strong as the Bard. The Bard is extremely powerful. The Cleric is also very, very good to have on your team, and you pretty much always want to have these two on your team. You can also do the game solo. You don't need them, but if you're going to solo Honor mode, it's actually best to go with the Bard, Smite Bard. So yeah, Cleric is a great ally to have, and you can play with Shadowheart. Put her as a Light Cleric. It just makes sense for the lore, and it makes for a very powerful build. So yeah, I would say that those are pretty solid. Next, we got ourselves the Druid, and I'm a huge fan of Druid. I feel like it can be a very useful one to go with. You can go with I would say the Moon Druid is probably the most effective in Honor mode, and the Spore Druid's good too. Typically with a Spore Druid, you do a 6-6 split, so you do 6 levels of Spore Druid, 6 levels of Necromancer Wizard, being able to summon 2 summons at once, as well as all the benefits of a Spore Druid. However, I think that the Moon Druid's probably the best here. Land Druids are great. I think in normal difficulties, they're very good, but you're probably better off going a Sorcerer at that point if you want a Spellcaster. But the nice thing about the Druid is they have their Wild Shape. So what makes Wild Shape so great is the extra amount of health that you get. Because in Honor mode, again, a total party kill it's game over for you. So if you can have someone with extra health, that's extremely useful. So the Druid's in an interesting spot because there is some better choices, I would say, if you want like a support kind of class. The Cleric is I would say, a superior choice to the Druid. I love the Druid, don't get me wrong on this. I don't think it's as strong as the 3 previous classes that we've talked about here. And again, I'm a big Druid fan. I pretty much always run a Druid in my normal playthroughs, but in Honor mode, I just don't find them as strong as other classes. And plus, the Wild Shape kind of ends up being not janky, but it just feels a little bit weird. And even like Shillelagh or Shillelagh is a really nice cantrip to get for early game damage, because you can take a torch and apply this, so it does 4 to 11 damage plus the fire damage. It's not good after. Well, it's not that it's not good. It's just not as good as the other choices. So, Wild Shape being their biggest boon, and being able to play Moon Druid probably being the absolute best because you can bonus action transform into a bear and then continue to rip shit up that way. But I'm gonna have to say the Druid's probably B tier, and this is a class that I usually think is like high A tier to S tier in normal game modes. It just doesn't have the same oomph and power that the rest of the classes have in Honor mode. So It pains me. It pains me deep down to do this, but I think it's just B tier for honor mode purposes. Still, you can beat the game with the Druid. I think they're a great class, but the others are just better. And now we got ourselves the Fighter. The Fighter, it's hard to go wrong with a Fighter. In any game mode, the Fighter's great, because at level 11, they get their improved extra attack. Now, they actually get a pretty hefty nerf in honor mode, because it works more like Dungeons and Dragons, where if you get haste, you only get one extra attack. Normally, if let's say you're playing in basic mode, like a just normal gameplay mode, you could get 3 attacks, get hasted, do 3 more attacks, action surge, 3 more attacks, a single level dip into the War Cleric, do a 10th attack. That doesn't happen. So honor mode actually benefits spellcasters a little bit more, because whenever you use haste, you can cast 2 spells, which is great because it's huge damage. 2 fireballs that can hit like multiple people, a massive. But the Fighter just gets the shorter end of the stick here. But action surge in honor mode will still allow you to do the 3 attacks. You can do your 3 attacks, action surge 3 attacks, and then haste an extra attack, or go with the Cleric extra attack. It's hard to go wrong, honestly, with a Fighter, because the Battlemaster provides a lot of extra crowd control. Like the Battlemaster Fighter is a great choice. They can also self-heal. They have action surge. You guys know what's up with the Fighter. It's a great class. I would still say it's a really powerful class and a great dip too. Like going with the Barbarian, if you take 5 levels of this, you can take 4 levels of that, and it's still a very powerful class. And then 3 levels of Rogue Thief. The only issue with the Fighter is, again, haste doesn't apply as much. The Eldritch Knight is still a good class, but I think the Barbarian becomes a better thrower. That if you go with a Throw Zerker, I think it's better than the Eldritch Knight in my testing. I've just stuck with the Battlemaster Fighter in honor mode, because the Eldritch, while I love the Eldritch Knight, I just don't think it has the same oomph that you would get out of a Barbarian thrower, so it's almost just better to stick with them. The Fighter is, I would say it's like still an S tier-ish choice, somewhere around S tier to A tier. Yeah, this is a tough one. I would say probably, I might put them in the A tier. They're extremely good. Don't get me wrong, they're not putting them in the S tier just because we have other choice. I need to keep this list somewhat balanced. 3 attacks, I can't understate how good that is, being able to attack 3 times, deal that much damage. They're tanky. They get a self-heal with their second wind there. The Fighter is an incredible class overall, but I think that some other classes get a bit more benefit in honor mode. The Fighter just, like, it's an S tier regularly, but it does lose a little bit of power from the haste not applying, whereas you could haste your sorcerer and cast 2 like chain lightning and a backup chain lightning. That's pretty good damage, or chain lightning, cone of cold, you know what I mean? So Fighter's still very good, but I think even the Barbarian brings a little bit more to multi-classes. When you go Fighter, you typically want to go to level 11 if at all possible, because that extra attack is just so good. Whereas the Barbarian just brings a lot of benefits to a multitude of builds. So that's why I have it a little bit ahead of the Fighter, but still very great class. But next we got what I think is probably the most broken class in honor mode. So everyone knows Thief, 3 levels of Rogue Thief, 9 levels of Monk, open hand. It's so powerful. You wouldn't go with a Shadow Monk really as much in honor mode, or a Way of the 4 Elements. Way of the 4 Elements runs out of key way too quickly, but open hand Monk, this is extremely powerful. You basically, once you get strength, you have to rely on strength potions, but if you're playing honor mode, you know how to get those pretty easily, and you can rely on them because it's just an incredible amount of damage, making it probably one of the best choices in honor mode, bar none, because the damage output, once you have a strength potion up, you're hitting from like minimum 30 to 40 damage. That's huge. Being able to do that multiple times, even better, because they got their attack, their extra attack, and then if you go Rogue Thief, you got a bonus action, Flurry of Blows, so that's 2 punches, and then you got the Rogue Thief, 2 punches, and then you can also get a 3rd bonus action. So it's crazy the amount of damage that you can output. You can also jump around. Their armor class is pretty decent too, not as high as some of the other classes, but they got good survivability because they can jump around so much and just deal a ton of damage. So Monk, also S tier. I don't know, it's hard to say if the Bard, the Bard is just so great with their smite builds and the arcane acuity, because you can do bonus, like as a Bard, you can bonus action crowd control, and that's huge. With the Monk, they're just pure damage. So these 2 classes, like if you go with these 3 classes, you got an extremely stacked team, and then you can choose one of the other classes. But there's one more class that I think is probably S tier as well. We'll be getting to that. But yeah, monk, it's just extremely strong. They're strong once you hit like levels, I would say. I mean, throughout the whole game, the monk's pretty good, but into the later levels, they just become unstoppable. They'll become your highest damage dealer for sure. I actually don't think that other classes can keep up. Like the bard does struggle, not too much early game, but once you get like to level 6 and get the extra attack, and then 2 more levels at level 8, they're pretty much fully online, and you'll have all the gear to make them strong. The monk is just a very strong class and gets stronger the further you go up. They have like a pretty, like the monk line of powers like that, exponential growth. But I could talk about monk again all day, similar to the bard. Next, we got the paladin. Now, paladin was my first ever class. It's like your first love, you know. The paladin's incredibly strong because of smite. Now, going full level 12 paladin is probably leaving something on the table. So I think that the paladin makes a great multi-class for a variety of reasons. 2 levels and you get divine smite. That just adds a bunch of radiant damage. And as I mentioned, pairing it with the bard, extremely useful. I don't know if there's any other builds that work as great as that. I've tried many different paladin builds. As I said, I love the paladin. It's one of my favorite classes. Be able to roleplay as like a police officer in Faerun is pretty fun, because you're like the keeper of all things good. It's a strong class, very, very strong. But I think the biggest thing that it brings is the smite at level 2. If you take it to level 6, you get the auras, which are also really good. Getting a plus like 5 or plus 6 to saving throws is massive in honor mode, because that just means that your team's going to be succeeding on more saving throws, which is obviously a very good thing with the amount of spells that get cast in honor mode. I would have to say that this is I want to put them in the A tier, but their biggest benefits are at level 2 and a level 6, and it brings a lot to the bard. Like, it's just A tier because of the smites. If paladin didn't get smite, they would probably be one of the lowest, but the fact that they get a smite to be able to add a ton of extra damage and upcast to it, it's kind of funny to me that a bard is a better paladin than a full paladin, but that's just the way it is. It's strong. It's very strong. I would say A tier for sure. And again, I love paladin. Next, we got the ranger. Now, there's one build that stands out to me for honor mode. The Gloomstalker Ranger is so powerful. Now, this is like something you get up to level 5, you get Misty Step, which you want pretty much every class to have Misty Step, Scroll of Misty Step, or like Long Strider plus being able to jump far distances. Reason being, sometimes in honor mode, the fight doesn't go the way you want it to, and you need to disengage and get out of there. So that's where the Gloomstalker comes into play, because they have the ability to Umbral Shroud, turn invisible. The Bard actually, again, greater invisibility is probably the best spell for getting away. If you're having a really hard time with the fight, you can just have your Bard zip out of there with greater invisibility. They can use that, turn invisible, run away, disengage, go back to camp, revive everyone, and it avoids the total party kill. Certain boss fights you can't really do that with, so bear in mind that. But Gloomstalker is basically, it's a good class, but I think that even if you go Ranger, you don't get that power spike to level 11. If you go Beastmaster, you don't get that power spike to level 11. And at that point, you may as well just go Fighter, because you'll have an easier time with earlier levels. So I like the Ranger a lot. I think it's a fun class, but it might be like a B to C tier. I don't know. I just don't think it brings the same level of strength that the other classes do. And I really like the Ranger, don't get me wrong. I might just put in C. Multi-class, the Gloomstalker is probably the best, but the Hunter Ranger and the Beastmaster, I think, weigh it down in honor mode. So I'll put a C tier, just because I feel like the Ranger got done dirty. And this isn't anything against Larian or Baldur's Gate, but even just Dungeons and Dragon rule set doesn't favor the Ranger that much. And in a game like honor mode, where it's super important to make every little difference, I feel like they just get kind of shafted in terms of strength. So you're probably better off, if you want to go with someone that's like a dex-based fighter, Monk. Even though the Monk does benefit heavily from strength potions, or even Bard. So the Bard does really what the Ranger does, but it's a full spellcaster, and it gets greater invisibility. Greater invisibility is super useful in honor mode. So yeah, max out your stealth. You can do a stealth Bard, stealth archer. Slashing Flourish allows you to hit 4 targets with your bow, versus that not getting it. So yeah. Next we got the Rogue. Now, if you can beat honor mode with a level 12 Rogue, like, congrats. That's an incredible, like, I don't even know if it's like fully possible. If you went Arcane Trickster Rogue, I don't know how you could beat the game with that. The Rogue is great for two things. One, level 3 Rogue Thief. Bonus action is huge on the Monk, which is really its biggest heavy and carrying feature. And it's also great on the Barbarian too for extra throws, extra punches, or even throws and punches from either of these. But I would say it's probably B tier. Like, I'll put it at the top of the B tier above Druid, because you're probably going to have someone with a Rogue Thief, but you're not going to take it past level 3. Or maybe 4 for the feat at most. But the Assassin Rogue is the other good thing that comes from it, because you can have that first turn Nova damage, which is really nice, and you get your action back if you start combat. So if you're playing Honor Mode, you definitely have played through the game before, so you're going to know which encounters to start, and the Assassin can be a great start for some combat encounters. I just think that the Rogue Thief is probably the biggest asset for the extra bonus action for a few classes. You can even add in like the Rogue Thief for a Sorcerer for extra quicken spell. So yeah, or even a Warlock can benefit from that extra. So there's a few different builds you can add this into. On its own, it's probably like the lowest tier, but as an addition to others, like a dip in Rogue is what carries the Rogue. So yeah, Astarion, Monk, Rogue, perfect build. Especially if you're going an evil road and ascend him, because then you can get the extra 1d10 necrotic damage and do flurry of blows, extra basically 20 damage at max, which is massive. So yeah, I think the Rogue Thief's great, but just for a dip. Next we got the Sorcerer. Now Sorcerers are just straight up a good class because you can twin haste. Now there is a lot of risk there, because if you twin haste to 2 people and then you lose your concentration, you lose your turn. So your Sorcerer and whoever you put haste onto. So that is one caveat of the haste, because you got to consider things that can potentially harm your team as well. Haste potions are also a good consideration. It's a bonus action. You get haste for 3 turns, and then at the end of your turn, you lose your turn. Afterwards, you get lethargic. So it is good, but I mean, the Sorcerer itself is very powerful. If you're going to haste, I would probably haste like some caster of some sort, because again, the extra attack doesn't stack in Honor Mode, but still, the Sorcerer is very strong. 2 main builds that I would say are best. Draconic Sorcerer early game, until you get the, once you take the Storm Sorcerer, it gets stronger around level 6 with Lightning Bolt. And you can also dip 2 levels of the Cleric Tempest to be able to give yourself the maximum amount of damage. So if you went like 9 levels of Sorcerer, 2 levels of Tempest Cleric to get the Channel Divinity to roll the max amount of damage, and then level of maybe Wizard to be able to scribe yourself Chain Lightning, because all 3 of these are full casters, and take a Chain Lightning max damage, which is 80 times 2 with Create Water. It's 160 damage spread to 3 other targets. That's really good. That's probably the highest damage you can get out of it is the highest damage you can get out of a spell. So, and yeah, I would say, yeah, they are S tier, but I wouldn't put them above. I would say the Bard's the best, Monk's second best, Cleric's third best, and then the Sorcerer. Normally in the game, I'm a big Sorcerer fan. I think Sorcerer is my favorite class overall. I love the Paladin. That was my first class, but the Sorcerer is my new favorite. I love the Sorcerer. It's so good with Quicken Spell. You just control the battlefield a lot better than a Wizard would, and I think the Wizard's great too, but the Sorcerer is just on a whole other level. So these 4, probably the best classes in Honor Mode. And yeah, I could talk about the Sorcerer for a while, but we'll move on to the Warlock so that I don't extend this video way too long. The Warlock, its biggest benefit is Eldritch Blast. And you can take just 2 levels of it to make the most out of that, because all you need is 2 levels to get the Repelling Blast and the ability to add your Charisma modifier to the damage. The Warlock also has a nice 1-level dip too, because you can go with the Great Old One, which will give Mortal Reminder. So when you land a critical hit against a creature, that creature and any nearby enemies must succeed a Wisdom saving throw or become frightened until the end of their next turn. That's pretty good. Note, the end of their next turn, not the start of their turn. So that is pretty good. So if you wanted a 1-level dip, the Goo Warlock Great Old One is huge. The Fiend's also nice for the temporary health, but yeah, getting a critical hit Eldritch Blast is really nice, especially if there's enemies grouped together. Eldritch Blast is just so useful. But I don't know if it's really worthwhile to take the Warlock too high in its levels, because for the most part, you're only going to have 2 spell slots that are maxed out until you hit level 11 and get the 3rd spell slot. So that's rough. And you also don't get level 6 spells. So there are some drawbacks to the Warlock that, I mean, it normally has them. The biggest difference that I think changes in Honor Mode. So it also nerfs the Paladin, because you could go with 6 levels of Paladin, 6 levels of Warlock, and you could get 3 attacks quicker than the fighter would get it. You can get it at level 10, so 5 and 5, the extra attack. does not stack from Pact of the Blade in honor mode, and that is probably the biggest nerf to the Warlock in general. It's still a great dip, but it just loses some of that extra efficiency. Like if the extra attack's still stacked, we would be looking at a completely different list, because the Paladin Warlock is such a good, like the Padlock or Lock It In, whatever you want to call it, such a good class with the being able to smite 3 times in a turn. That's really great. And then also use your Charisma modifier, so you can go all in on Charisma. Then you can use the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel and do some crowd control with Command Grovel. The Warlock, I feel like I'm going to put it in the B tier because it does multi-class pretty well. If you want to go with like a Sorlock, like go Eldritch Blast focused, that can be good, but it did lose a lot of its luster from getting that extra attack stacking, which now it more or less plays like normal D&D, which makes sense. So yeah, I would say it's B tier. Still not bad. You can win the game with really any of these, but yeah. Finally, we got the Wizard. Now, one Wizard build stands out above all others, and it didn't actually get any nerf, and that is the Abjuration Wizard. This is like a tank wizard, and it's actually pretty good because you can run around with Armor of Agathis, proccing that extra damage, cold damage, create water, double that up. It's guaranteed damage, it's not a dice roll, so that is really good. The Wizard really has that build. You can multi-class the Wizard, and that's what makes the Wizard so great, is if you really want to use a Tempest Cleric, one of my favorites, take a level of Wizard, and then you can if you use the Warped Headband of Intelligence, you can land Chain Lightning if you have items that's going to give you an increase to your spell save DC. So there's like the Battle Mage potions will give you +3. There's ways to mitigate the lower intelligence you may have. So the Wizard's still a really great class. I would say it's tough because going full 12 Wizard, you're almost better going full 12 Sorcerer or Cleric, and then dipping Wizard because you can scribe the spells and get 4 of them. So I don't know. The Wizard dip is what carries the Wizard in honor mode, I would say. Still a great class. And Abjuration, if you want to go high in the Wizard levels. Or even Necromancer mixed with Spore Druid can be a decent one in honor mode. But yeah, I do think that the other casters, like we got 3 full casters in the S tier. The Bard, the Cleric, and the Sorcerer are all incredibly powerful choices. But yeah, this is what I would say would be pretty generalized honor mode best classes. If you went with these 4, you'll probably have the easiest chance with beating honor mode. You could also swap out the Sorcerer for like a Throw Zerker or a Fighter if you want someone more tanky, because you don't really have much tanky in this there. So some one of these classes is great, but you could also go with a Storm Sorcerer, 1 level Tempest Cleric, or 2 levels Tempest Cleric, and then you can also get heavy armor that way, so a little tankier. But yeah, that's what I think is probably the strongest classes for honor mode. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I'll see you all in the next video.